Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're jumping right into a topic that I know a lot of us follow closely, but we rarely map out the whole picture. We're looking at the architecture of persistent poverty. It's not just this simple lack of money in a bank account. It's actually a completely invisible framework holding an entire ecosystem together. So today we're going to use a dual lens approach to break this down. First, we'll look at the mechanical, structural economic systems built right into our society. And then, just as importantly, we're going to examine the profound psychological conditioning and the mental coping strategies that naturally emerge when someone is just trying to financially survive for prolonged periods.
Okay, let's dive into this. And honestly, there is absolutely no better way to start than by tackling this idea head-on. If hard work alone generated wealth, every single mother working 3 manual labor jobs or farmer working 16-hour days under a scorching sun would be a billionaire. We really have to shatter this meritocracy myth right out of the gate. Because chronic poverty, it's rarely a reflection of individual laziness or a simple lack of effort. Think about the hardest working people you literally know. Exhausting, back-breaking physical labor doesn't automatically translate to financial security, does it? So if it isn't just about how hard someone works, we've got to ask ourselves a pretty fundamental question.
Why do people stay poor? It's a heavy question, right? But it's totally crucial. Look, when a person enters this world without a baseline of capital, they aren't just starting the race from a few paces behind. It's not like that at all. They're actually playing a completely different game, and the rules of that game are heavily penalized. To really grasp why the vast majority of people who are born poor stay poor, we have to map out exactly what those rules are.
So, let's get into Section 1, the structural architecture. These are the game rules of poverty.
Economists generally refer to this as the classic poverty trap. And I want you to notice how this loop works because it's relentless. It starts at step 1, with low income. That means every single dollar goes strictly to basic survival. Food, shelter, the absolute bare minimum, leaving zero room for savings. And that immediately triggers step 2, zero savings. Without savings, you literally have no capital to invest in things like higher education, professional skills, or assets, which slams us right into step 3. Low productivity. Because the individual couldn't afford to acquire new skills or tools, their earning capacity remains permanently capped at low-wage, manual, or gig labor. And tragically, this all culminates in step 4, intergenerational transmission. The cycle just resets. The next generation grows up facing the exact same lack of resources. It operates as a mathematically closed loop, and there is almost no exit ramp.
And this brilliantly illustrates one of the absolute cruelest paradoxes in modern economics, the poverty premium. Basically, it is incredibly expensive to have no money. Let's look at purchasing goods, for example. Wealthy individuals can afford to buy in bulk, which drastically lowers the cost per unit. But the reality for low-income families is buying small, single-use packages because of immediate cash flow limits. Over time, that actually doubles their long-term costs. Or look at banking. Wealthy individuals enjoy free checking and high-yield savings. But if you don't have a minimum balance, you're hit with monthly fees. You're forced into check cash and kiosks that siphon off a percentage of your paycheck. Or you get completely trapped by predatory payday loans. And housing? Prime mortgages build generational equity for the wealthy. Meanwhile, the poor face subprime loans or lifelong renting, where up to half their income goes straight to a landlord with absolutely zero equity return. Literally, just surviving the week requires paying a premium.
And because of these premiums, building any sort of financial buffer is mathematically near impossible, which perfectly sets the stage for what's called the one-shock reset. Consider the asymmetry of risk here. For a middle-class person, a broken car transmission is, an annoying inconvenience. You pay the mechanic from your savings account, and your life just continues. But for someone living right at the poverty line, that exact same mundane inconvenience is a catastrophic, life-altering event. It sets off a complete domino effect. A broken car means you can't commute to your hourly job. Missing 2 shifts gets you fired. Losing your job means you miss rent. Missing rent leads to eviction. A single, totally ordinary negative event wipes out years of disciplined budgeting and hard work and just resets a person's life completely back to zero.
Which brings us to Section 2, the cognitive mechanics, or the internal survival wiring.
13. I really want that number to sink in for a second. Behavioral economists have documented that living with the constant, grinding mental strain of scarcity temporarily drops a person's functional IQ by roughly 13 points. To put that into perspective, that is the exact cognitive equivalent of losing a full night of sleep. When you are constantly consumed by immediate survival questions, like how am I going to pay rent tomorrow? Or is my card going to decline at the grocery store right now? Your brain enters a state of perpetual high alert. Scarcity isn't just stressful, it acts as a massive, literal drain on your cognitive bandwidth.
This severe mental overload causes a psychological phenomenon known as tunneling.
Basically, the brain hyper-focuses entirely on the immediate survival crisis in front of it. It places you inside a literal tunnel. When you are desperately trying to resolve today's emergency, your brain physically loses the ability to allocate mental energy toward anything outside that tunnel. That means things like long-term financial planning, networking for a career, or taking time to learn a new trade are completely blocked out. You have to understand, it's not a lack of ambition at all. It is a hardwired biological survival mechanism.
Which leads us to another highly misunderstood behavior, hyperbolic discounting. A traditional financial planner will always tell you to sacrifice short-term luxury for long-term security. But if your future has always been volatile, unpredictable, and entirely unsafe, well, the future feels like an absolute mirage. Why save for 10 years down the road when you literally don't even know if you'll survive the year? In this context, choosing immediate, certain rewards isn't a bad choice. Actually, scratch that. It's highly rational dopamine rationing. When daily life is defined by deprivation and systemic exhaustion, spending a rare extra $20 on a fast food meal is a vital coping mechanism. It buys immediate emotional regulation in an otherwise unendurable lifestyle.
And if that immense effort over a prolonged period continues to meet systemic failure, whether due to structural barriers or just simple bad luck, it creates what psychologist Martin Seligman coined learned helplessness. This is a conditioned belief that you have absolutely no control over your outcomes. The internal belief that my actions dictate my life shifts entirely to the world dictates my life. When your effort constantly yields absolutely no rewards, it is completely logical that people eventually stop applying for promotions or trying to rigidly stick to a budget. Their lived experience has literally taught them that trying just doesn't change the outcome.
All right, Section 3, the generational network, the invisible social capital.
So the crucial point is that wealth comes with a hidden curriculum. Wealthy families pass down this implicit, invisible financial education. At wealthy dinner tables, the native language includes things like asset allocation, index funds, real estate equity, compound interest. But in low-income households, there is a massive financial literacy void. Money is rarely discussed as a tool for leverage, right? It's discussed almost exclusively as a source of scarcity and stress. Because there's no excess capital, there are zero conversations about stock portfolios. This means even if a low-income individual experiences a sudden influx of cash, they lack the foundational literacy passed down in wealthy networks to actually preserve and multiply it. And that leaves them incredibly vulnerable.
So let's wrap this up with Section 4, shifting the baseline and dismantling the ecosystem.
Let's move to and see how this builds into a real solution. Because breaking out of poverty requires far more than just adopting a growth mindset or working longer hours. It requires dismantling the entire ecosystem. It demands a dual intervention approach that addresses both lenses we've used today. First, systemic stabilization. We have to stop these devastating capital shocks by ensuring access to living wages, fair banking systems, reliable healthcare, and affordable childcare. And second, we need cognitive relief. We must create enough financial breathing room so that the relentless scarcity mindset can finally deactivate. Only when the brain reclaims its cognitive bandwidth can a person safely and effectively plan for the future.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Are we ready to stop doing poverty as a personal moral failure and start recognizing it as a designed ecosystem? When we understand the mathematical traps, the poverty premiums, the cognitive drain of tunneling, and the invisible social networks, the picture becomes undeniably clear. Poverty is an intricate, self-sustaining ecosystem. The real question is, now that we can see the architecture of this system so clearly, how will we choose to change the rules of the game? I'll leave you to think about that. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.